Welcome. Here we are at the number 14 episode.
With it's not 13.
the girl on 13 was very upset it was 13. But we're on number 14 with Shay O'Hanlon. How are you, Shay?
How are you, John? Grand, thanks. Great.
Lovely. So Shay, a bit of background into Shay. Shay was a racing cyclist. Started off hosteling.
I did,
cycling.
Yeah.
Was a racing cyclist. Mr. Ross Talton won the Ross Talton, Ireland's first and great amateur race. Won that 4 times, and now does a bit of mountaineering, hiking, and a bit of climbing.
And a bit of cycling still.
And a bit of cycling still. So I suppose we'll go back to the very start, and I'll ask you about where you were born, whereabouts in Dublin you were born.
Yeah, I was born on Innisfallen Parade off Dorset Street.
Okay. And
I lived there until I was 9, just after I was 9, which will be 70 years ago in a month's time. We moved on the 1st of November 1950 up to Collins Avenue.
Okay.
And funny enough, I lived there then until I got married. And I moved back across the canal to where I originally lived. I moved back to a flat off Whitworth Road.
Okay.
And then I bought a house in Ballygall. So if you drew a circle about 2 miles across, I always lived inside it.
Right.
In the north side of the city.
Brilliant. Yeah. And school, when you went to school, did you play any sports, or what were your interests when you were in school?
No. Well, you see, when I was still living in Innisfallen, I learned how to ride a bicycle. My sister tried to teach me how to ride a bicycle and held me up, and I just fell off, and, it didn't work. And there was a fella who used to come to the house, and there were no gardens, it was a house, footpath on the road. And when he'd be going, he'd sit at the footpath on his bicycle talking to us at the door. And I used to watch him, and then one day I got the bike out, and I put it at the footpath, and I put the pedal on the footpath, and I sat up on it, just imitating him, Jimmy Holden, and I pressed on the pedals and went off, and down the road I went. And of course I was delighted, and I was so delighted I forgot to pedal anymore, and I fell off. But that was it. I was away at that stage. And for the rest of my life, I would have left Innisfallen a year or 2 after that. And then when we moved up to Collins Avenue, we were the first house from the corner of Larkhill Road.
Okay.
And there was an angle, where you'd have 2 houses on the angle.
Yes.
Well, there was no house there.
Okay.
And because there was no house, there was no footpath. There was the shape of a footpath, but it was only beaten earth.
Yeah.
And I remember that when I went up there then, there was another fella from the far end of the block that I lived in. And the 2 of us would spend all day riding up and down around that L and skidding our bikes around the corner on the dirt and all. But as far as I can remember, that's all we ever did, So I was cycling like that. And then there was a brother in the school. I brought her up Flatla. I went to O'Connell schools.
Okay.
And there was a brother there, and he ran a thing called O'Greer, and it was all about speaking Irish and all that and promoting Irish.
Yeah.
And he used to bring us out on a Saturday, maybe 5 or 6 of us on bikes.
Right.
And I remember we went out to Rollastown, out to Derry Lossery, and various ruined churches, St. Dulux there near Campions.
Yeah,
Kinsey. So a lot of places like that.
Yeah.
The Dolman out at Brennanstown, out on the south side. And he brought us out touring to a place on different Saturdays, and that gave me an interest in antiquities, and it fed me interest in cycling. And then I started going out on my own, and we used to cycle out to Knoxie Down, a couple of the neighbours and myself, and we'd be playing out there around the river and all, and then cycle home. And then I started to go over the south side and up by the Hellfire Club and up as far as Killikee and across to Glencullen. And then I could go further to Glencree and down to Enniskerry. And then I could go to the Sallygap and over to round. I kept extending. But I was cycling all the time.
Yeah.
And then I started hosteling, and it was great because when I was, 57, I would have been going on 16, just well into my 15s. And 3 of us went off for a fortnight hosteling around Ireland. We headed off from Dublin and down by Waterford and across through Cork and over to the Black Valley in Kerry and back up through Clare and into Mount Shannon and back over to Kilkenny and home to Dublin again. But we were gone for a fortnight. Imagine letting 3 15-year-olds go off for a fortnight. I mean, my parents, if they lived now, would be put in jail for doing that. But that was it. Like, so an Oiga used to run evening in Dublin. They used to run evening cycles. I forget what day it was. Let's say it was on a Wednesday, and I went out on those and, be going around with other fellas and that. And then one fella on the group that we were with said to me, "Why don't you try racing?" Yeah. I'd never thought of racing, And I said, "Oh yeah, I must try racing, And I began to look at it then. And then I went up to the Navan Road to see a race, and I saw races there. And I saw a fella that lived around the corner from me racing, a fella called Eamon Ryan from Larkhill Road. So later on in the week, I called up to him and I said I want to join a cycling club. I want to go racing. And he was in the Thalton and he said, "Yeah, well, I know the club for you. It's Clonbrua. That's the club you should join." He didn't tell me to join his club.
Right.
But he sent me off to join Clonbrua. And I looked them up then and I found out that the head book cat lived over in Crumlin in Clonard Road, Steve Abbott. Okay. So I called over to Steve Abbott and he wasn't very impressive. I met him, he was coming home off the bike and he was tired when he was getting off the bike outside the house. And he said, "Oh yeah, come out with us on Sunday, Yeah. So I went out on Sunday, but there was only one other fella and myself, Jim Ludden. He's in Swords now and he's still racing.
I know Jim, yeah.
You know Jim,
yeah.
Well, the two of us went off and that was early 1958. And that means I would have been 16 and a half. Right. And we headed off down to Ashford and across to Rathdrum and back up to Dublin. And stopped in Rathdrum for our dinner because that was the habit at that time.
Yeah.
You went in for your dinner.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. So then after that I started racing and continued on. I stopped hosteling and went racing from then on.
And how long were you with Clonbrua when you won your first Ross, or did you change to
No,
Thalton
I stayed in that club. You see, the club wasn't like the Irish Road Club or the Dublin Wheelers, with lots and lots of members. There was maybe about 10 or 15 of us in it. It was more like a group of friends than an organisation, It was a team rather than an organisation. And as happened with all of these things, eventually fellas get married and so on and so forth. And, we weren't into recruiting people. Keep people floated in the door. We weren't into... So eventually I ended up the last person in the club. And then I joined another club, Team Allied Irish Finance, with Gene Mankin and Seamus Kennedy and that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I suppose, the step into the Ross, then with your first Ross, were you riding one-day races or just riding whatever? Like, you were doing time trials during the week and racing as much as you could, or were you selecting races
Well,
then?
you see, when I started racing in 58, I still had a year to go in school.
Okay.
And it was great because I didn't like football or anything like that. If we were playing football in the schoolyard, I was always the last one picked,
Yeah.
And when we used to have O'Connell's had a pitch out at Clontarf, and we used to go out there to play football on a Thursday, on a half day, physical education. And I used to spend the whole day trying to be at the opposite end of the pitch from the ball, so that I wouldn't have to do anything, because I didn't know what to do. And then one day I said, I was in fifth year, and I said to the brother, I said, "If you let me go off on a Thursday on my bike, I'd go off on my bike every Thursday and I'd be out all afternoon and I'd be getting exercise. But if you send me to the football pitch, I'm going to keep going, trying to stay away from the ball and get as little exercise as possible." And he let me go.
Nice.
And there were 2 or 3 of us out of the class, and we were left go off on a Thursday on our bikes, and we'd go off for the afternoon. And like one day I remember we went down to Glendalough on the half day, you know. So that was great. So I was racing that year, and then the following year I did my leaving in June, I suppose. So I was racing the first year and a half, did my leaving, and then rode the Ross about 2 months later, because the Ross used to be in August then.
Yes.
And I would have finished the leaving, I suppose, May, June.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been, I suppose, I've always felt like I rode the Ross early, and kind of when you ride the Ross, kind of the races dwindle off, so it would be a good time maybe if it ever gets put back on again, that they move it to August to keep the fellas going for that bit longer.
Yeah, but then the problem used to be that nobody raced after the Ross. You know, it was the same problem. You had this big peak, and then people just sort of
fell away,
went off to do other things. Yeah.
And I was looking at a photograph. I think you were about 18 in it. I'm not sure. You can correct me on this. And you were getting presented. You're out there winning the Ross in the Phoenix Park.
Yeah.
And it said in the photograph that there was 40,000 people in the park to watch that.
Well, yeah, that would have been written by interested parties, like, you know. They didn't count everyone. But there were certainly... You see, the thing about it then was, the way I look at that was, that in those days... people went out to see a bike race.
Yes.
They went to sports, in you know, the parish sports all around the country. They went to the sports. They followed show bands.
Yes.
You know, what happened in the country was important.
Yeah.
And it was only later on that that you got television and people could actually look into the eyes of guys from America and all sorts of places, and cyclists from France and Belgium and everything. That everything became much less local.
Yes.
But at that stage, you'd get huge crowds in the Phoenix Park for the finish. Yeah, you would.
I was listening to Paul Kimmage. He was speaking on a podcast and he was talking about his dad. And I think it was the Ross's dad was talking about. It wouldn't have been the Tour of Ireland. It was a Ross, and he won a stage in the Gorey, Christie. And he said coming up to the finish, like they were 5 deep either side.
Oh, yes.
And even Sean showed me old photographs. It's. I kind of feel sad now because I raced in the park. I remember you get a few bodies in the park, but I feel sad going through it now because Irish cycling has lost the park.
Yeah, but I don't think it's just Irish cycling. I think anything that was big prior to the 60s, and certainly prior to the 70s, anything that was big then wouldn't be big anymore.
Yeah.
No matter what activity it was. That's my theory anyway.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I suppose you're forced... So the Ross was 9 days then, was it? What?
It was. Wait, let's see. When I rode it first, it was an 8-day.
8-day race.
Yeah, it was 8-day for a couple of years. And then it went to become a 10-day.
Okay. And when you won your first one, were you expected to win? How did you feel about it? What was it like taking part in it? Was there many foreign teams in it?
No, there was no. And it was the only foreign teams was there used to be an exiles team, and it was people who had gone away to live in England, immigrants who had gone to live over there, who came back to ride the Ross, and there'd be one team of them. But apart from that, it was all local, you know. And the first year I rode it, that was 58. I would have been 16 going on 17, and I rode it and I finished 13th, and I got second in the last stage. So the next year I thought I was going to win it. I said, you know, the next year I stepped up a bit and I thought I was going to win it, but sure, Paddy Flanagan walked on us all. He was great, and they had a great Kildare team. And so the following year I was going to win it. And, you know, this was all in my head. This wasn't written anywhere. This was all in here, you know. And I was going to win it, and one of our team, Tom Flynn, got the jersey. So we stopped the race. Now, to be quite honest, we stopped the race so that he'd win it.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, I slipped the loop every time, and I think I won 4 stages that year as well, which was great for the Dublin team. But it disappointed me that I hadn't won it, you know. And then the following year, it was coming up, and I was definitely going to win it, and I did. You know, but it took the pot was on the hob for a while before it boiled. Yeah.
And the stages then would have been 90-mile stages, 100-milers.
Well, I remember the first year I rode the race, and I did very well that year, because the first day up through Slane, we were going to Dundalk, and I lost 20 minutes that day. I finished way behind on my own, knackered, you know. And the thing was that I clawed my way back through the week, and I ended up in 13th overall.
Right.
But I remember one of the stages, it went from Westport to Ennis, and as far as I remember, it was 154 miles.
Jesus.
I know that the whole 8-day race was 960 miles because I have the certificate at home. You used to get a finisher's certificate, and it says, you know, 960 miles in 8 days and the time and so on.
Brilliant.
But it wasn't easy. You see, in those days, fellas used to compete to who could run the longest race. We had to just ride them, you know. But they were happy that they ran the longest, hardest race.
Kill the participants.
But we loved it.
No, it's and my dad was telling me a couple of stories about rooming with you. He roomed with you on a few.
I'd never forget rooming with Sean Lally. We had to tell him to shut up because he'd be there talking all night. And it was gas during the race. It was actually great, you know. You'd have maybe, as far as I remember, there'd be maybe 3 or 4 of us in a room, every night. And you'd be lying there and the lights go out, and then you'd be all talking there for ages. And it was really great. It was really living.
Good. Like, as we touched in the conversation we had the other day, like, and I kind of think back as well. And I miss it because it was great fun.
It was
great fun.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the only reason you did it was because you wanted to do it. You grew up through the various stages of the activity, and then you found racing, and you wanted to do that. You wanted to ride your bike, and you wanted to have the laugh with the lads, and so on. And you had all sorts of relationships with all sorts of people, and it was just a life. It was great.
And me dad, he paid you a great compliment the other day. He was talking about some race up to the Spelga Dam, and you were absolutely killing everyone, and you went off the road. He said he rode away from probably 9 of the best riders in the country at the time, and he says, I made an effort. He said, I made such an effort to get across them that even my teeth were hurting. And he says, I said to O'Hanlon, I'm just happy to be second, keep riding. And he said, it was like being behind a bus. He said he didn't even look over his shoulder, and he won easy. He would have killed us all. But my dad was saying about you as well. He said, like, I put Shay up there. He always rated high riders as Liam Horner and Peter Doyle.
Oh, Doyle was great.
And he says, everyone says, Kelly and Roach. He said, they were beatable. We could all beat Kelly and Roach. But he said, you couldn't live with OH, Horner or Doyle.
Yes, that's how.
That's what the lad says about you. He says, you couldn't live with them 3. They were the 3 best riders. He said, taking into account Billy Kerr and all these guys, they were the 3 best riders I've ever ridden in Ireland against. So there you go.
That's
you got a compliment off the
lad. Yeah.
And then you won a couple of Rosses then, and you still ride your bike now. But how did the mountaineering and the hiking, how did you come across that?
Well, you see, when I joined the Clonbrugh, there was a guy in it, Shay Murphy, who also lived around the corner from me in Larkhill. Like Jim Ludden and Murphy both lived in Larkhill, just around very near to my house. and they were in the club, and Murphy was in the Irish Mountaineering Club, and he used to do a bit of climbing, and he used to go off in the hills, wandering around the hills and so on. And he brought me out, and I think one of the first places he brought me was down to the Glen of Amal, and we camped on top of Lugnaquilla in the snow, like, you know.
Lovely.
And we had tar paper under us. That was all you had for insulation, tar paper, which was paper sort of with tar in it, you know.
Yeah.
And he brought me out to do things like that and walking like that. And it was a great... First of all, I enjoyed it. I liked doing it.
Yeah.
I liked the places we went to. And secondly, that I found it was great that you could be on the bike from Christmas to September.
Yeah.
And then on September, you could put the bike away and go off every weekend and walk for 5, 6, 7 or 8 hours.
Yeah.
And that it was a great change of scene. And also it was great for your fitness.
Yes.
So, like, it was really a win-win situation. So while I was racing, like, I raced for 30 years, and all the time I was racing every year from September, some date in September until Christmas, I'd go walk in the hills.
Yeah.
And whenever it snowed in January and February as well, like,
Nice,
you know, when you
nice.
couldn't go out on the bike. And I kept that up all the time. And then when I was about 48, it was 1988, I was 47 that year. I was riding a race and I was here in Ashbourne, and there was something on the road on a Saturday morning, and everyone just fell in front of me.
Yeah.
And I fell, but I didn't touch anyone.
Yeah.
The bike just went out from under me, and bang, I was down on the road. And I broke my hip. I broke the neck of the femur. And that was April. And that was the end of that year, you know.
Yeah.
By the time I went in and got it fixed and all, there was no resuming racing.
Is that the Dublin Drogheda or a club
No,
race?
it was just a race that started down at Finglas and went out somewhere around this way and then went back in again. And so that was the end of racing for that year.
Yeah.
And the thing about it was, at that stage I was 47, well past myself by day, but still enjoying myself.
Yes.
And I didn't know how I didn't think about it, but I don't know how I ever would have got out of the racing. Because the other thing was, I didn't race that much with the vets.
Yes.
Because I enjoyed the company of the young fellas, like, you know, and the racing. I just enjoyed the air of the open races more than racing with the vets.
Yeah.
You know, that was my personal thing, because the vets were great.
Yeah.
And so I stopped in and I said, now I know what I'm going to do, because I knew all the guys that I had known in the late 50s, early 60s who used to climb in the IMC. And I said, now I can take up rock climbing, because I had been reading mountaineering books and everything all through, like all the time it was there and it was an interest. So I said, that's it, I'll take up rock climbing now. So I became a rock climbing groupie, like, you know. Yeah. I mean, I was never very good at it, but I really liked it.
Yeah.
And the beauty about it was that I never had to retire. You know, I never had to face up and say, this is the last. I remember my last Ross. Yeah. I remember coming into the Phoenix Park and saying, this is the last one now. I'm crossing the line and, you know, going off by myself and saying, that's over. Yeah. But with this, I didn't have any trauma. There was no sense of an ending because I just failed. I stopped in the middle of a race. I didn't say I am finished. I just started doing something else. And it was brilliant, you know. So I've been doing that ever since. I've been doing the walking and the climbing. And I still go out on the bike all the time because I like riding a bike. Yeah.
Brilliant.
No matter how slow I go.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And you've been in the Himalayas?
Yeah, we went over to the Himalayas in 2000. There was a team of us from the Mountaineering Club. We went over to India, and we got 3 people up to the top of a mountain there, a first ascent of a mountain there, Kanglatarbo 1. And they did that, and that was very satisfactory. And before that, in 1995, there were there was a whole lot of cyclists took up the walking and the climbing around that time. And I used to knock around. Dermot Dignam did it, organised the Ross. He was big into it, you know. And then there was Paul Keogh and Medlinski. Yeah. And the two of us used to go off, and we went to South America. We went to Aconcagua in South America, which is the highest mountain outside Nepal in the world. And we went to that, and we got stormed off it. I got frostbite. We got stormed off it. But it was a great experience. Yeah. And then in 2000, we went to Kangla Tarbo. And then in 2004, I think it was, Joe Lyons and Dermot Wall and myself, we went off to South America again, and we went to another mountain there, the second highest mountain there, but Aconcagua was crowded because it was one of the 7 summits, and there'd be loads of people going there wanting to climb it. Yes. And we went to go to a mountain near, about 100 kilometres away, Mercedario, which was slightly lower, but there was nobody there. Okay. We were dropped by the outfitters that brought us in with mules and brought our bags into the base camp. They dropped us and went off and left us there for about a fortnight, and there were only 3 other people on the mountain while we were there. There was nobody else in reach, and it was a 3-day walk in to where we were, and so you were really totally isolated. It was great. And then again in 2008, another group of us went to India, to the Himalayas, and we went to climb another mountain, but we attacked it we went to it from the wrong side, and it just wasn't possible. So I've done 4 trips like that to the high mountains, and I never got to the top of a mountain, but the experience was brilliant. It was only great,
Brilliant. And any accidents, mountain climbing, or just all a bit of fun?
No, I fell off. I fell off the bike and broke that leg, and then I was climbing in Scotland with Paul Keogh and a few of the lads, and Paul and myself got caught in an avalanche. Jesus. And we came scooting down the mountain in the middle of the avalanche, and I broke the other leg.
Oh, Jesus.
But that was the only accident,
Yeah. That's a bit of crack.
But I mean, it wasn't, we were lucky to get off. Paul got a sprained ankle and I got a broken leg. But that was lucky to what could have happened to you.
Yeah. I suppose if you don't try this stuff, if you sit at home on your sofa, you'll be nice and safe. But who wants to do that?
Well, you do what you want to do,
Exactly.
And you figure you hope you're going to get away with it.
Sure, it's an old experience, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I read about you there a while ago in the Irish Times. You wouldn't have read this, but I was reading about it. And I'll explain the backstory of me reading it. Like, my dad was in Spain when this virus broke out, and I was trying to get him home, and I was worried, and because what we were getting in the media, Jesus, you'd swear the world was going to end. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
and I kind of was believing these media outlets that were coming on. And then after a couple of weeks, I was kind of going, this is a load of bollocks, to myself. You know what I mean? I was reading a bit more into it, and you're seeing the percentage of the people it's hitting. You know what I mean? And I opened the Irish Times and I read about the Bell Shea here. And the Bell Shea has gone, I'm not cocooning, I'm going to live my life. And I was like, fucking yes! Yes!
Yeah.
Oh, it was great to read.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way I looked at it was, the advice was good. It was good to not to be mixing with people, and it was good to stay out of circulation. But it wasn't good to stay in a house. Like, I go out anyone knows that they go out on the bike and they're not in contact with anyone. Yeah. You're not going to pick up like if you're on your own, if you're in a group, it's a white horse of a different colour. But for me, I could go out on my own. I wouldn't be within 10 metres of anyone, except the people passing me. Yeah. And so I disobeyed the rule of staying in, but I stayed within the 2.5 kilometres, and then I stayed within the 5 kilometres and so on. But I went out for an hour every day.
Yeah.
Because you see, the second thing is that by the time it was all over, we didn't know how long this was going to go on.
Yeah.
we had to sort of put an idea it'd be 3 or 4 weeks at that stage.
Yes.
And even 3 or 4 weeks at that length of time doing nothing, he would have gone backwards a huge amount. And like at my age, you're not going to make that up.
No.
You know, you'd be in the box before you make it up. Like.
Yeah. And I think as well, like the advice, what you said on keeping active, I think like the mind that you have and the mind that me dad has and the mind some sports people have is different than normal people. Normal people are like, okay, the man is after telling me to stay in my house, that's what I'm going to do. Whereas like, I'm only speaking to me dad after, you know, and finding out the new information. It would be like, Dad, kill him. Do you know what I mean? It'd be like a caged animal.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Dad, kill him. You know, so we need to get out in the fresh air and the sunshine or the rain or whatever.
Whatever. Like when that was in force, I wouldn't go out until about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah. And I go out then because then I had it to look forward to all day.
Yes.
If I went out in the morning, first thing in the morning, then for the rest of the day, there'd be nothing just sitting around the house and the day would be over. Yes. And it was great to have something to look forward to.
Yeah.
That was great,
Yeah. And do you ever do any indoor bouldering on the indoor stuff? Or
I do, yeah. What we do now, there's a group of us. And I think I'm the oldest in the group, and the youngest is 65. There's about 8 of us. Okay. And during the winter, we meet on a Tuesday and a Friday morning, and we'd go to Dublin Climbing Centre in Tala, or we'd go to Awesome Walls in Finglas, and we'd climb there for a couple of hours.
Deadly.
Yeah. And then in the summer, we tried to get climbing outdoors.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's nice the way they have a coffee shop down there.
Oh,
the
it's
little shop
grand,
and a few cakes. And
yes, you've been in there.
No, we got me both sons do a bit of bouldering down there as well.
Yeah.
It's just for a change.
Oh yeah,
we
it's
do
nice.
It for a change, you know.
Yeah.
The boys do martial arts, so they like the bouldering for the grip strength.
Yes.
You know, the martial arts that they do really focus on grabbing a hold of people and grip strength.
Yeah.
And the bouldering, like what you do with the mountain climbing, it when you were cycling, it's a change.
Yes,
it's completely
that's right.
different.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you're using your body a different way, and it's mentally a change from doing whatever you do. You know, so that's why they
you
like
need
doing
that.
it. 100%.
I used to love that when I was racing because you'd start off at the beginning of the year and generally it fell into a format that'd be short enough races getting longer and longer, and then you'd have the longest races for a while leading up to the Ross, and then after that you usually used to have a load of sports meetings and we'd go off on the track, riding on the track around the place.
Yes.
And then late in the season, you'd have what Joe Crystal used to run festival races, which were criteriums, and run them in various towns around the country. And they'd be maybe 50 or 60 kilometres, and you'd ride them, and maybe you'd ride on the hard track as well. So there was a variety through the season. You weren't just doing the same thing all the time. And I think it's very important. I see fellas now racing and they seem to be on the bike from the 1st of January to the 31st of December.
Yeah.
I always think they're missing out on something.
Yeah. I think as well, what's been highlighted as well, I still keep an eye on the cycling in Ireland and I'm watching the Tour de France at the moment. And I really think that the system, we don't have it so much anymore. We did back in your day with the Navan Road and in Dad's day with the time trials. But we've kind of moved away from that, whereas the Brits still do it. They groom the kids on that 10 mile, 5 mile TT every Sunday. If I'm your son, you bring me down to the local club and we ride time trials all over the place. They're nice and safe. And it changes it up for them, and then they have the track then in the winter time. So they have a mix, whereas we don't really have that. It's just the road, and there's no mix like that, you know.
But the road is great.
It is.
When I was racing in the NCA, we didn't have many time trials.
Right. Almost
like you would have ridden maybe 2 or 3 25s, and in my whole life, I'd say I rode about 450s. And 200-mile time trials, and that was it. We didn't. We concentrated on road racing.
Yeah, Whereas I'm looking at the Brits with all their tracks now all over the place. The tracks now in Ireland, it'll be a struggle if we ever get one in Abbottstown. But even I spent a bit of time in Australia, and I used to go to Bankstown. It's a track that was used for the Olympics out there. And I wasn't cycling at the time, but I used to go in and watch. And they'd have kids like 6 and 7, lovely and safe, but flying around the place. And like your little L at Lark Hill there, the bike handling skills. The bike handling skills are something else. Like if you're riding on a bank track, you can handle a bike.
You can, And if you have the nerve to ride on a bank track, you know, because it's very intimidating.
I was sitting in the.
Oh, you're sitting looking down.
I
hope I don't fall out of the seats.
So hopefully they can get a track organised here.
It'd be great,
give the lads something to go for in the winter. You know, it'd be good to go. So what... Moving on, have you any plans when this is all have you any trips planned or any just into the mountains, Wicklow, or any trips abroad?
Well, I go off walking the hills every Sunday, but I haven't any trips abroad because I went to the Alps there a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I'd say, with Paul Keogh and another fella, and we headed off up to the hut, the first place we were going to, and I arrived there about an hour and a half after the boys. Like, I just hadn't got it, you know. And then I was totally wrecked that night. And the next day I got up and we were to go on to the top of this mountain. And there was also a hut near the top of the mountain. And the boys headed off. I said, no, I'm not going. And I know that I'm not up to that sort of thing anymore. You get that you can't carry the weights either, you know. So I don't have any plans to do the sort of things I used to do. But all I want to do is get out and enjoy myself. And I enjoy myself just walking any old hills or anything. It's great because you go out, and there was a time there I was working for myself, self-employed. And, you know, you'd be all frazzled at the end of the week, especially like it was wholesaling bikes. Coming up to Christmas, you'd be mad busy, like, you know. And I always remember that you'd be totally frazzled from the week. And I go on a Sunday then and park the car and change, put on my boots and head off across the hills. And everything just falls away. After 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, there are no problems. Your mind is as smooth. There's no wrinkles in it. You don't care about anything. And that's what it does for you, you know.
Mother Nature takes care of everything.
Yes, it's really brilliant.
And my dad was saying you speak French as well.
Yeah, when I was racing, I went over to France for a year. And I raced over there for a year. And when I was there, I learned French. You know, I had to learn French because I was living in this little village. And I tell you how bad it was. When I arrived in France, I was in the airport in Paris. No, I was in the railway station in Narbonne, and I had to get a train to Perpignan. And I went in and I had my little phrase book to know, you know, what I was going to say, like, and where it would say tickets. And 2 girls took me in charge and they brought me over to buy a ticket. And I went over and got my ticket. And I went out onto the platform then. And I remember saying, this is like these Second World War films that I used to see. We're all refugees lying around, you know, displaced people lying around the station. You know, it looks most strange. And I got the train, and it was only 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later that I discovered that there was a one-day national rail strike on, and there was the odd train running, and that I had caught one of the odd trains. But I was in the middle of this rail strike and hadn't the foggiest idea of what was going on there. And then 6 weeks later, I was in the village and I was sitting in the cafe talking to some of the lads, and a guy came down from the restaurant where I used to eat, and he said to me, would you come up to the restaurant? There's a few Australian girls up here and they don't speak French. Could you sort of translate could you find out what they're trying to say? And I went up and I couldn't speak English. I walked in and I said, ha, ha, ha. hello. And it took me about 10 minutes before I could speak. That's what happens when you're totally immersed in the language.
Yeah.
Like nobody in the village spoke English.
Yes.
Nobody in the cycling club spoke English. Yes. So you just had to learn it, and it was great. Yeah, it was great.
And how I'd say that was enjoyable. Did you, like some people either liked France, loved it, or absolutely hated racing there, that they were the foreigner? How did you find it?
No, I liked it. I really liked it, but it was, in those days, it was completely different to now. Like, I went away in March, the day after Patrick's Day, I went away, and there were no Ryanair flights. No. Like, you know, it would have cost, you couldn't afford to come home during the year. There was no way of coming home for somebody's birthday or for a long weekend, right? You went and you didn't come back. I didn't come back until November. And that was, I found it lonely. You know, at times you'd be lonely. Now, I had great friends over there in the club over there, and they were really great people. But, you know, the hardship is the fact that that you're on your own, like, you know. But apart from that aspect, everything else about it was great. It was great.
New experiences.
Yeah. And you got and you saw, you know, how a different country raced, the approach of guys to races and so on, you know. And I learned an awful lot there. In fact, I won the Ross once before I went there and 3 times after I came back, you know. So there must have been some benefit in it. Yeah.
And did you race with, like, did you come across any major stars when you were racing there? Because the French back then were the ones who ruled the roost.
They did, yeah. You know? Now, when I went over there, I got, you see, there was 3 associations in the country here. There was 2 sides and 3 associations, and I was in the one that wasn't internationally recognised. So I went over there, and what you do is you bring your Irish licence, you hand it in, and you get a French licence. And of course I had no Irish licence, and they said, oh, well, you'll have to get your Irish licence to join the club, like, you know. So the boys here forged an Irish licence for me, you know, and they sent the licence over, but it was an amateur licence they gave me. Now, there was another category at that time which was called independents, who were between professionals and amateurs, and they could ride professional races, but my license was only as an amateur, so I couldn't ride with the pros. And like, there was a couple, you know, after the Tour de France, they have a lot of criterium, short races on circuits in towns and villages. And I went to see some of those with Anquetil and Tommy Simpson and all sorts of guys like that riding them. And if I had had an independent licence, I could have ridden, but I hadn't, so I didn't. Like, but it was still a great experience. Yeah.
Excellent. So I suppose we'll wrap it up at that.
Yeah.
It was great having you on the podcast. It was
Thanks
great
for having
listening
me.
To. And after our conversation the other day on the phone, you kind of, sometimes I get honed into different things, but like, and I do a different sport now, and I just jump from one sport. I follow a similar vein to yourself, but I don't put much thought into it. Yeah. Because it's what I do. I'll always do something. Because just sitting on the couch,
you couldn't do that. No, you couldn't do that.
You have to be having some type of fun.
The thing is, lots of people can do that.
Yeah, Jesus. Say a prayer for them. God help them.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's...
they lack a dimension in life, like. That's the thing, yeah.
But anyway, I'll see you out on the roads on your bike anyway. I might bump into you bouldering down there.
You never know. You will,
one day during the week. So Shay, it was great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, John.
And that's us on episode 14. Hope you tune into this one. Give our page a like, give the podcast a share, give it a bit of support. And we have 6 t-shirts left for sale. Buy a t-shirt. Yep.